As a 5'3" black male living in 2026, heightism has done way more damage to my life than racism ever has. Heightism is worse than racism. I know it isn't PC to say that, but that's actually part of the problem. A guy named Shami said this exact thing about a month back, and everyone lost their friggin' minds. Not over whether he had a point or not. Oh no. It was just that he said it at all. Some of you are probably going to hate me for this video, and that's a sacrifice that I'm willing to make in order to stay true to myself and say what I feel needs to be said. But those of you who stay to the end to hear me out, you just might come away from this video with a more enlightened perspective on how the world works. Or maybe you'll just double down on your own view of reality. So let's get right into it.
Nobody wants to say it, but heightism might actually be worse than racism. You see, racism is socially condemned. You say something racist, you lose your job, your reputation, your platform, etc. Society punishes you. But mock someone for their height, that's not condemned. It's actually normalized. It's entertainment. It's a preference.
Well, that was it. A segment of the famous Shami clip that took the internet by storm and inspired me to make this video here today, because it set the whole internet reeling, and he made a really good point about heightism being socially condemned. But there was a flaw in his video, and that's that he focused more on the dating aspect of heightism versus racism, which leaves open a pretty big way for a lot of these detractors to minimize heightism as just something that only affects dating and preference, and that it's nothing like racism. But the reality is there is so much more to heightism than just that. It's quite clear to me and many others that there's a gap between the recognition of heightism by society and racism. Heightism isn't treated as a serious topic by anyone other than the people living it and the scholars who've studied it. Even so-called progressive activists who fight against every other form of prejudice mock heightism. No one in 2026 is afraid of being called heightist, but everyone, except based chuds, is afraid of being called racist. It's really just a matter of consequences. People in the UK are being arrested for offensive tweets, and middle school girls describing their abusers on the news are being harassed by police for inciting racism. In 2018, the beloved YouTuber Count Dankula was convicted and fined 800 British pounds under the Communications Act of 2003 for a grossly offensive electronic communication. His appeals, including to the UK Supreme Courts, were rejected, all for posting a video of his dog doing a World War II German salute on Twitter to annoy his girlfriend. Who gets to decide what is and isn't offensive? Probably not me or any of you watching. That's for sure. It's a subjective decision, and heightism is never part of that assessment. A mainstream national magazine explicitly grouped heightism with racism and sexism as an established prejudice over 50 years ago, and only 2 of those 3 prejudices ever got the cultural reckoning. Yet people go around saying heightism doesn't exist, and no one bats an eye. But imagine the fallout if they were caught saying that about racism. One of my German viewers exposed rampant heightism being perpetuated by his female professor, who openly mocked the idea of heightism. In academic institutions, there are multiple subjects of study discussing race and gender, but bring up height once, and you're labeled an inkwell. The problem extends to the online world as well. Try searching Google for an alternative idea or opinion, and you can't find a single result that doesn't parrot the mainstream narrative. Only one opinion is allowed to occupy the search results and influence the mind of voters, and to distract and divide us so we don't start investigating tall supremacy and discovering the real agenda. This little forum conversation from 2019 summarizes the power they have over media to punish critical thinking. Any conspiracy theory video that strays from the mainstream narrative gets buried by the algorithm. Free speech on the internet is free no more. PC or politically correct culture is over the top, but the thought police never come after you for body-shaming manlets. But make a race-related joke, and you're canceled for good. And if you think heightism never had an equivalent to blackface or racist vaudeville acts, think again. The heightpill niche is saturated with 6-foot-plus LARPers appropriating shortness, and every generation is shown manlet minstrel show equivalents in the media fed to kids by Disney from childhood. The brutal reality is, heightism is now the last socially acceptable prejudice. One thing you're going to see a lot of in this video are people of color agreeing with me that heightism has more of an impact on your life in today's day and age than racism does. And this is my first example of that.
Arguably, I think heightism is worse than racism. At this current point in time, obviously. Right, so if I made fun of my friend for being short, but they made fun of me back for being black, it'd arguably be, even though I hurt them first, they'd get in more trouble because race and racism is socially condemned, unlike making fun of someone for their height, something they can't change, exactly like their race. And I've experienced both. I used to be really short, like first 3 years of high school, I was like 5'5" max, dude. I'd much rather take like 10 racist comments a day than when I'm short, getting called short every day.
So we're hearing from a guy who's both been short in his life and has been black his whole life. And even he says that he would rather be insulted for his race than his height. And he's making the exact same point that I am, and that's that there's a recognition gap between heightism and racism. Whereas when you say something racist, you're socially condemned and get in trouble for it. But when you say something heightist, everyone just laughs it off and pats you on the back. Now that we've covered the recognition gap, it's time to talk about systemic heightism. Race discrimination in hiring is illegal. Height discrimination is not. You can legally pass over a short guy for being short, but try that with race and you got a lawsuit. And I'm not just talking about applying to be a firefighter or something either. Sperm banks set height minimums, while race is a non-issue. People would flip a bitch if sperm banks started turning away people of a certain race. But they can turn you away for being short and nobody blinks an eye. And it goes right up the ladder. We had a black president before we've had a short one in over a century. And according to the book Too Small, Too Tall, the taller candidate won 80% of the elections in the 20th century. 80%. Then there's the corporate world. The average Fortune 500 CEO is 6 foot. 90% of them are above average height, and less than 3% are under 5'7". That's not a coincidence. That's a filter. And here's the part that really pisses me off. We built an entire institution around correcting prejudice with diversity, equity, and inclusion, environmental and social governance score, and equity programs. And short men are the one disadvantaged group that gets completely ignored. A DEI department will treat a 5'4" guy as exactly as privileged as a 6'4" guy, purely because they're both men and of the same race. The stats prove that short men earn less, get hired less, and get promoted less. And there's not a single program anywhere designed to correct it. Anti-racism has become an untouchable institution, all while heightism just got ignored for the last 60 years of progress. And it doesn't stop at the paycheck either. This one 4'11" black guy told me he thought he might qualify as a little person and get disability benefits. He got excited and then found out he wasn't short enough to count as disabled, but is still short enough to earn much less than his taller coworkers. Think about that. Too short to get ahead, but not short enough to get any help. That's the ever-widening height and income gap. And it bleeds straight into the next thing they love to bring up: dating. Racism is a cultural construct, restricted to certain eras, but heightism is biological and universal. Now, there is some instinctual merit to the idea that birds of a feather flock together, but those distinctions have changed so often throughout human history that it's more taught than instinctive. You don't usually see children being born racist. Kids often don't see color, as long as the cultural difference isn't too extreme. But height? Kids see that straight out of the gate without even having to be indoctrinated. and then they get indoctrinated on top of it. The big kid dominates the small kid straight from the outset. And that's because heightism goes back to prehistoric times. Racism is bounded by culture and era, and it varies by both. Meanwhile, animal survival instinct creates urges for the larger member of a species to exploit the smaller ones for resources, and the smaller ones to submit to avoid injury and further humiliation. It's the same idea as smaller kingdoms being made to pay tribute to larger ones. Even people who disagree with me on everything else are on the same page here. Shorter people are perceived as weaker because of evolutionary psychology, and that's not going anywhere. But racism is a lot harder to explain from a purely biological standpoint. It goes so deep that the UN literally uses height to measure how healthy a population is. Your height is an indicator of your childhood nutrition and social class. In our height lies our history, and the penalty follows you across every group. Short men earn less. That's a consistent trend across brackets, and it can't be attributed to ethnic differences either. So it doesn't matter what skin color you have. If you're short, you're most likely earning less. Same story with attraction. Women will always want taller. And studies show that for the most part, there's no such thing as too tall. Race is a filter for some people, but height is a filter for almost everyone. It's a status symbol that's far more rare and valued by women than race ever was. So earlier in the video, I showed you guys a black guy who made a great example about why heightism is worse than racism in his eyes. And that example being an institutional example, an example of how heightism has actually been institutionally dished out. Because when authority starts having a double standard on how they enforce different types of prejudice, as soon as that authority starts getting involved in deciding what's better and what's worse, that's when you start having actual institutional heightism. Now, institutional racism was really bad to the extreme in the past, but we're talking about modern day here. And now I've got a perfect example of another person of color giving their 2 cents about how heightism has affected their life more than racism. And this guy's South Asian, so let's hear what he has to say.
Every single short ethnic would agree that heightism is worse than racism. I would say 99%, and the 1% are coping. Who's going to get discriminated more? The short ethnic or the tall ethnic? The tall ethnic usually gets away with less discrimination because he's taller, he's harder to pick on, etc. It's subconscious. I'm fucking South Asian. I'm from one of the most discriminated ethnic groups worldwide. If we're talking about the past, yeah, you're right. Racism was probably worse in the past. But if we're talking about now, heightism and lookism is worse.
And this guy makes a great point, which is something that I've talked about many times throughout the videos on my channel. And that's that racism is not experienced to the same degree by someone who's tall versus someone who's short. And the amount of prejudice overall in general that somebody faces is more determined by your height than by your race. Because a person of any race, a person of color, who's tall, who towers over everybody, who people feel intimidated by, who looks down at people and those people look up at him, he's still going to have that halo effect. He's still going to get the respect that a person of the same race or even a white person who's short would get. People are going to be afraid to cross him. So as a result, racism is not going to affect that person as much as it would a short ethnic person. And here we have a short ethnic person even saying on top of that heightism has affected his life more than racism, even though he's both short and ethnic. And this ties in perfectly to the idea of how heightism has been incorporated into our instincts and genetic lineage over thousands or millions of years as humans. You know, race wasn't really a factor in tribal life 100,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, but height always was. And it's much more deeply ingrained in our genetic memory than racism is. Then there's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Life comes down to altercations. Who backs down and who doesn't. Who gets disrespected and who has the upper hand. And height is the #1 predictor of coming out of most altercations on top. There's a good reason why nobody's racist to the guy who towers over them. And it's the very same reason an antagonist like Chud the Builder is 6'5". To those who don't know, he's a tall, rich Chad who live streams himself hatefully hurling extremely offensive slurs directly at black men's faces and sprays them with pepper spray at the slightest hint of aggression.
Or what?
How the fuck you saying?
Back up.
Shut the fuck up.
Back up.
Stop saying.
Or what?
Why you saying for?
You might want to back up. You're gonna get sprayed.
Why the fuck you saying?
Because I can say it's America.
But why?
Or what?
So
Back
why?
up.
This is why.
Back up.
Okay.
Bro didn't want to get sprayed.
That's why you carry your fucking mace.
I got something else for you too if you want it. I'm trying to spare your life.
He was recently charged with an attempted murder of an unarmed man he antagonized. You'd think someone who's 6'5" and built wouldn't need to resort to shooting a smaller guy to avoid a fistfight. And yet, Chud still has women who want him. Even black women. If he was 5'4", he'd have gotten his ass pounded on his first confrontation. He never would have gotten anywhere doing that shit. Asmongold said it best. When you make reasonable discourse impossible, unreasonable discourse becomes inevitable. But why is it that Chud the Builder even had an audience in the first place? Personally, I think it's the impact of extreme wokeness, pushing the pendulum all the way in the other direction. A form of rebellion, if you will. Now just imagine for a moment the privilege of having an advantage in basically everything. Plus, you physically dominate your peers. Plus, it makes you sexy. How OP is that? It's like God designed our classes and builds to be completely unbalanced. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand how ignorant people look when they try to gaslight short men by stating with confidence that height has no bearing on a person's life outcome. That if you're short and white, you have the exact same amount of privilege as a white guy who's a foot taller than you. That the modern-day psyop the media has concocted to build an industry around convincing black people in 2026 that they should fear the police, and occasionally having people feel threatened if they see you in a dark alley, is somehow worse than all the disadvantages short men face in this video. That feeling threatened example is absolute bollocks, too. Who would you feel more threatened by? A 5'3" black guy or a 6'5" white guy? Hold that answer. We're coming back to it. To help you answer that question, let's talk about the real lived experiences that short men face due to height prejudice. So now we're getting a little bit more specific on all the different ways that heightism affects your life versus racism in the modern day. But this guy is a little bit more nuanced, but he doesn't quite want to say it, probably for fear of social reprisal. So here we are.
Heightism versus racism, which is worse? That shit is a bold statement to say that heightism is worse than racism. But what I will say is, height is a motherfucker, man. Because if you're a man that's short, other men will play you at your job, at the office, construction sites. People will step on your toes, they'll get over on you, and they don't really care because they feel like if you buck up on them, they're going to be like, the fuck he going to do? I'll slap his ass down to the ground.
Exactly. That's what I was saying earlier, that people don't want to say something offensive to a tall guy, regardless of his race. So a tall person of color is far less likely to experience racism in the first place or any other form of prejudice. So if you really think about it, if people are constantly afraid of being called racist and saying something that might offend someone based on racial lines, and they go out of their way to avoid that, yet height is open season. And if you're the small guy, you just have to sit there and take it because what are you going to do? Those kinds of interactions compound over the course of your life and lead to you having worse life outcomes. And then you compound that over many generations of lineages that are at the bottom of that social hierarchy. And you have a situation where you've got generational heightism leading to generational subjugation and lack of resources. Now, today, there are a lot of people of color that still have the effects of generational racism, but most of those issues were addressed way back in the 1960s. They've had a lot of time to catch up in today's day and age, and they've had a lot of equity programs to help them do it. What do you have for short people? Not jack shit.
Because you short. People are more openly prejudiced towards height. Men kind of understand men and try to have empathy for them. Even if they're not short themselves, they'll have empathy for you a little bit. But that's only some men. Women, they are a hive mind. And you got these misandrists and feminists. They kind of try to use that against you. Like, if you're short, you're not 6 feet, they'll use that to toy with man's mind and to break down the spirit of men in society.
That's a great example, too. You know, talking about the height pill, this is the first time that we've had short men gathering together in a community to support each other and validate each other's lived struggles. Whereas when it comes to racism and sexism and all that stuff, they've been supporting each other for decades or centuries now at this point. And he makes a great point here is in that a lot of heightism that's enacted in today's day and age is mostly done by women. And we're not just talking about dating here. We're talking about women are in positions of power more often than ever before. And they will use those positions of power to pick and choose who they want to give favor to. And you think they're going to give favor to the guy that they think is puny and inferior? Hell no. Then there's the impact of bullying, both verbal and physical. The pain endured by victims of height-based bullying isn't just momentary. Its effects last a lifetime. And the impact made by the bullies, who are physically superior and tend to come from more affluent families, can be either subconscious or intentional. The idea is to condition the small man to know his place as the little guy, to train him to know who's boss and not step out of line. This outcome serves the interest of the elite, who want to cultivate a more vulnerable, docile underclass. When short men inevitably work under the thumb of a tall boss who doesn't take them seriously, that conditioning and instinctual fear makes it that much harder to negotiate better pay, and that much easier for others to step on you on their way to the top. And if you want to talk about microaggressions, we have no shortage of demeaning language at the expense of short people. I made a whole video on this, the heightist phrases that are baked into everyday language. So watch that for more detail. It'll be linked in the description. When you're a short man, women's shallowness gets reframed as your personality flaw. You're gaslit into thinking the reason they don't want you is because something's wrong with you as a person. Now, if you'll remember what I just said about how women are enacting and manifesting heightism in their daily lives, even more so than men, this clip right here is a great example of that. And there's a little surprise at the end, too.
Or they just a horrible person or like emotional, just like attention seeking or any of that stuff. It's usually because they're short. I don't care. I don't like short men. I think that they are very, very problematic.
Wow. Just wow. You know, she wouldn't be saying that about someone's race. Imagine if she was to replace short in that statement right there with black or Mexican or whatever else. I mean, and to think, you know, she looks like a Latina. She's basically humiliating most of the guys of her own ethnicity because they tend to skew to the shorter side, but she's getting away with it by using the more acceptable form of prejudice. It's obvious to me that because she finds short men repulsive, she wants to use whatever justification that she can in her mind to justify her hatred of short men. I mean, you could see the sadism in her eyes there. And here we have another black guy who's both black and short here ready to chime in on this. Let's hear what he has to say.
You know, I'm 5'7", and I feel like if I could choose to be tall, of course I would. But come on, man, it just breaks my heart to see all this gibagoo about short guys, man.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't choose your race, you don't choose your height. And this guy says it perfectly.
We choose this life. I feel like y'all got to take it easy, like as women, because This shit crazy. What did we do?
Yeah, man, it's fucking heinous. It's evil. It's like these women are possessed by some dark demon of lust. It becomes like a fetish, you know, to worship them and uplift them. But that's what it is. It's lust and height worship, while humiliating those that are the opposite of what they find attractive. To put us down, put us in our place, you know what I'm saying? It's sadistic, but it's kinky for them. That's why I say it's like an evil, demonic possession or force. And you want to talk about institutional prejudice? It starts with the fact that men can't even be honest with their feelings without the system being weaponized against them. And since short men struggle the most with mental health, you see where I'm going. And think about how much worse of an experience prison is for a little guy compared to a big guy. The traumatizing experience of constantly living in fear, having your food or commissary stolen, being bullied and intimidated into not having access to the phones or workout benches, being targeted for forced sexual exploitation, having to become some tall guy's prison slave or girlfriend just to survive, and the deeply degrading humiliation that comes from all that. Compare that to the prison experience of a tall guy of any race. Instead of being the one at the bottom, you get the power trip of being the one on top. How is it fair that two men can commit the same crime, but the smaller man experiences a punishment that's much more damaging? To me, it feels like the legacy of slavery and colonialism has just turned into an excuse to take and take from the white working class until there's nothing left to give, regardless of if our ancestors owned slaves or not. To loot us for scraps, all while the elites who benefit from this mess through cheap labor and political power sit safe upon their hilltops, surrounded by security, completely sheltered and insulated from the consequences of their policies and luxury beliefs. All while perpetuating Heightism in the background with the widening income gap and getting the peasants dependent on their cheap processed slop and chemicals. All while distracting us with talk of reparations and nullifying the people's political power through chaos, ethnic voting blocks, and pillaging and plundering us dry with their fraud, corruption, and regressive taxes. I wasn't always like this, though. It took many encounters and realizations before I turned into the cynical man I am today. So here's a quick overview on some of the personal experiences I had that helped shape my view on all this. The first unforgettable experience I had regarding racism happened way back when I was 6 or 7 years old. I used to have to go with my grandma to her tennis practice matches a couple times a week, you know, and they would go from the late afternoon into the night, and in the late fall and early spring, it would get pretty dark out there. And some of these parks had bathrooms that closed at a certain time. So there I was, bored out of my mind for the millionth time, watching my Nana's tennis game, having to piss like crazy. And it's like, okay, the bathroom's closed. What do I do? So I go out and I find a tree and I just pee on it. There's nobody around. It's nighttime. What's the big deal? But it turns out there were some kids playing on the play structure about 100 feet away in complete darkness. And I only really noticed them when I heard them speak. And as they spoke, I could just barely see them in the dim, distant light of the tennis court. I could see two short-haired Mexican kids that were about 11 or 12 when I was 6 or 7. And I hear them yell to each other, "Hey, that little white boy's pissing in our tree. Let's get him." And they immediately start sprinting after me, full speed. So what do? I panic. I'm a fucking little kid. So I run, my heart's pounding, and I sprint right through that door into the tennis court. And a few seconds later, they come around the side, and it's like, oh shit, let's book it. Because now they're in the light. So when you have an early experience like that, being designated by two older Mexican kids as little white boy and attacked, it leaves a mark. Through high school and college, my opinions on immigration and race relations aligned pretty closely with the liberal narrative. It only really started to shift when I got really into Rastafarianism and, meditating on these reggae songs and getting stoned all the time. That, I started watching documentaries and learning that most of these Rastafarians hate white people. they call us a white devil and all this stuff. Hell no, we're not welcome unless we're going to bend down and kiss the ground they walk on and apologize in tears every chance we can get for things that we had nothing to do with. So yeah, fuck that. Wasn't really interested in Rastafarianism after that. But I still had a pretty progressive mindset by the time college came around. I slowly began realizing how little progressives care about Heightism, or any struggle young men have, especially white men like me. People are out there acting like a 5'4" white guy is just as privileged as a 6'4" white guy. That's what drove me away from them. That and all the bad policies and corruption that led to life getting harder for the working class Americans who have to rely on cheap food and chemicals that could be stunting their children's growth, perpetuating Heightism. But anyone who points that out is called alt-right or fat-phobic or something. I realized that socialism could never work with people like that in the puppet master position, sowing the seeds of division. And you know what it was that pushed me even more over the edge? That fucking gas tax. Here in California, they already require gas companies to provide a special California formulation that raises the price. But on top of it, they added a 66% flat gas tax at the time. I think it was 2018. Might even be $1 now. Point is, it's a regressive tax that hurts the poor more than the rich. That's when I knew for sure that these people were con artists. Oh, and of course, can't forget when they started banning vapes and vape liquid in 2019 and have a 15-year-old girl give a speech at city council about why vaping is racist. So right after college in the summer of 2019, I got involved in a work program intended for underprivileged youth, preferably people of color. But considering the parents I had, they let me in. It was actually interesting to see how privileged some of the teens in this program actually were. Getting picked up and dropped off in a brand new Mercedes. But they were given priority simply for not being white. By this time in my life, my views on equity and economic and environmental policy had shifted in a direction that diverged from the ideology this organization intended to promote. And it all came to a head one day when they drove us down to Oakland for the Bay Area Program Convention. Now, it was around this time that Oakland really had started to go downhill. I remember seeing it on the drive there and realizing that I hadn't driven down here in about 5 years and seeing how much it had declined. It almost drove me to tears. I mean, I'm a pretty compassionate guy. I have empathy. So I was already kind of in that mindset when we got to this convention building and all gathered in this big audience to listen to these people talk about this program and all the impact it's had and blah, blah, blah. And it was funny because I noticed how our group from the North Bay was the only one that had like any white kids. There was like a total of 5 other white kids in the whole group of like 1,000 people. And this is something I noticed immediately. And I'm not saying they all were black, like about half of them were Mexican, mixed and stuff like that, but still. And the only other white people in the room were, you guessed it, the leaders, the people at the top, the CEOs, the organizers. And of course, all of them were tall too. So you had this 5'11" white woman giving this speech, this performative speech in front of all these young people of color who've been taught to have a chip on their shoulder their whole life and taught the reason they're oppressed is because of their race. So she's up there spending the whole time talking about white privilege and whiteness, reparations, white supremacy. And honestly, I can't quite remember exactly what she said, but it was probably even worse than that. And I just remember looking around the room, kind of looking at the different white kids who were there, and I could see the discomfort in their eyes. And mind you, these kids were basically all teenagers. Like, I was the oldest guy in that program. I think I was like 21 or 22. So the kids are all being indoctrinated to believe that white people shouldn't be allowed to be in power anymore. So when I said my team had some of the only white people in it, I really just mean that me and one other person were white in the team. So we were the only team with 2 white people. So it was me and this 6'2" trans girl, and she was right next to me. So I turned to her and I was like, hey, is this making you uncomfortable at all? Like the things she's saying? And to my utter joy, she says yes. Yeah, it's making me uncomfortable. And I am so glad I got to voice that to her because, she was probably having some kind of like cognitive crisis about it. And I am very happy that I was able to plant that seed in that person, to make them question this narrative for the rest of their life. That's based. But that wasn't all I did. So this lady up front, she went from talking about white power to the Green New Deal. That political plan that is to reform the entire country to be more environmentally friendly. And I've always been an environmentalist. But when I dug deep into that Green New Deal, I saw some problematic shit. And a lot of it makes us dependent on China, just passing off the pollution to them, just so we can give ourselves a pat in the head. And besides that, I had my own ideas for how to create an environmentally friendly future. And none of them were included in the Green New Deal. And I realized that bill would hurt the economy so much that it would make it impossible for entrepreneurs like me to ever make those kinds of innovations a reality. On top of it, living in a rural area with terrible public transport, I know firsthand the kind of damage the gas tax can do. If fossil fuels become too expensive, working class people relying on their old beater cars to drive 25 to 30 minutes into town, they'd be completely fucked. They wouldn't be able to survive. And maybe that's exactly what they want. They want to make it impossible for poor people to survive out in the sticks. Stuff them all into the city so the modern day gentry can have complete control over the countryside. Kind of like feudalism, Don't poach the king's venison, that kind of thing. So there was an opportunity for people to ask questions and make comments. And to be honest, I'm a lot more reserved now, so I'm not sure if I would have done this today. But maybe I had the balls back then because of higher testosterone levels or something. But I decided to stand up for the interests of my constituents. So I raised my hand, I got called on by this tall white lady, and I stood up and formulated my voice. Now, I don't remember for sure what I said that day, but I basically talked about the part of the Bay Area that I came from. The problems we have with access to amenities. I basically made everyone aware that poor, underprivileged white people do exist, and they do need access to cars because otherwise we'd be stuck out in the middle of nowhere with absolutely nowhere to go to get food. So yeah, having affordable gas and access to combustion engine vehicles is pretty damn important to us. And I don't know if she's a pushover or what, but to my utter pleasure, she ended up completely conceding to me and saying that everything that I said absolutely held merit and that she acknowledges all of it. And I really appreciated that, but it kind of contradicted everything else she was saying before. And everybody in the crowd noticed. And instead of being charged by an angry mob, I just had a lot of confused, shocked looks like, wow, that guy has balls. But yeah, the managers of the team didn't really like me that much after that, especially the one mulatto lady that drove us back. She didn't really talk to me the rest of the time. And just a few months later, I had another bad experience, this time in the Westfield Mall in San Francisco. So I had my backpack and I was going down this escalator when I noticed there was plenty of space in front of me and there was a guy right behind me. So I started walking down the escalator for two reasons. Firstly, to save time. And secondly, I consider myself pretty street smart, having spent so much of my time growing up surrounded by shifty tweakers with sticky fingers. I don't like when any stranger is behind me, in arm's reach of my belongings. So there I go, quietly minding my own business, when this 20-something-year-old black man behind me yells at me, accusing me of being racist in front of hundreds of people whose eyes were now all on us. I looked him dead in the eye with my best poker face, eyes glazed over, and said nothing, and then walked away. That one little experience had a massive impact on my views regarding racism. And just over 6 months later, the BLM riots took place in the summer of 2020. Now, I care most about working class people and small business owners, and access to healthy food. And to see what those scum did, burning down local businesses and driving grocery stores out of their neighborhoods, creating food deserts they always blame racism on, it became increasingly difficult to have any sympathy whatsoever. You want to know who I have sympathy for? The families who lost everything in fires that night. And for the innocent people who were accused of hate crimes simply for defending themselves or their property against violent rioters and looters. Foids like this will straight up tell you who actually gets blamed for the legacy of colonialism. The ones who had nothing to do with it. But does she apply her judgments fairly? Hell no. She'll weaponize her politics against you if you're short, but she'll throw all that out the window for a tall guy. I think it's important for every white person around the whole world to hear this, and that's that it's okay to take pride in your country and your heritage. Myself, I'm proud as fuck to be an American. My ancestors weren't slave owners, but we were colonizers. Shanghaied from Belgium, escaping in Texas, and proceeding to conquer the frontier and settle the fuck out of the Wild West, mixing with the Irish, Spanish, and the Apaches. I'm proud of them too, how bravely they fought against these invaders. Scalping motherfuckers, that's badass. And apparently, I'm from a line of medicine women, which is fucking awesome. And of course, the Portuguese ancestors who settled the Azores. It's an island chain in the middle of the Atlantic that was used as a prime base and stopping point for the slave trade and whaling industries. Yeah, not the most ethical. But Portugal was the first modern European nation-state and helped immensely in reconquering Iberia from the Muslims. And aside from the Polynesians, we had the world's best navigators too, which is also badass. Because I feel a spiritual connection to the ocean and the sky, specifically when out on the open sea. And my Celtic roots are the ones I resonate with the most. The wild savage within, the pagans, druids, shamans, and fearless Celtic warriors who fought against the Roman invaders. But yeah, I feel as if in the modern day, we all live in one of two completely separate realities. One where people recognize that Western society has gone above and beyond to address racism, sexism, and homophobia, and that Heightism has been ignored long enough to grow into the main source of prejudice in the 21st century, and another where people still think we're living in the Jim Crow era, and that Heightism and lookism are just made up by inkwells who want victim points. The people in that reality have specific objections to those living in my reality. So let's hear them out. Welcome to the Victim Olympics, where every group gets to tally up their suffering, all except one. As we go through every reason normies gave for why short men are disqualified, you'll start to notice a pattern. They're all stuck in the past. Comments like these were everywhere. Pfft, thousands of years? Sounds like someone doesn't know history. The only racism I can think of that's lasted thousands of years is the French and the English or the Koreans and the Japanese. It's time for me to debunk a lot of the ridiculous objections that I got when I made my original TikTok video. And these first couple clips demonstrate a ridiculously profound level of ignorance when it comes to Heightism. Speaking as if they know better than we do, talking down to us. It's literally like the Heightism version of mansplaining. Having women or tall guys, regardless of their race, talk down to you and tell you how your lived experience actually is, while demonstrating literally no understanding of how it actually plays out. And the first type of objection that we got is basically people trying to say that all Heightism is dating preferences. Now, so let's see how this girl right here thinks about the situation.
Y'all think y'all can add ism to anything and just make it something. Heightism? And then you had the audacity to compare it to racism? So y'all gotta relax, all right? The insecurities about your height, you need to go talk to somebody. When it started getting to a point where you want to compare it to something like racism simply because there's groups of women who don't want to date you because you short. Right? You don't have anything stopping you from doing stuff on a day-to-day basis from you being short. The only issue that you're having is that some of the women that you want, you can't get because you're short.
Okay, so first of all, she tries to say we need to talk to somebody while actively contributing to our body shaming by blaming us for all the problems in our lives. It's literally victim blaming instead of, oh, all these things happen to us, and over time, from being beaten down and talked down to and mistreated and labeled as inferior our whole lives, that we naturally end up becoming less confident and more insecure. But then you got someone like me who literally wants to be shorter, who loves being short, who's not insecure at all, and I'm still being called insecure and blamed for every single bad thing that happens to me. It's like these people assume that they know you. And then she goes on to say that height doesn't prevent you from doing anything in your day-to-day life. I'm sorry, but how does racism affect your ability to do anything you want in day-to-day life? You want to talk about heightism. If you're a really short guy, you got to be worried about walking alone in the big city. You got to be worried about being a target for muggers. You know, it affects your negotiation outcomes when you're negotiating for raises, especially if your boss is a lot taller than you, which more often than not is the case, if you look at statistics. The halo effect impacts how people react to what you say, whether or not they hold value in it. If you have a great idea and you're a really small person, they'll see it as less valuable than if a really tall guy says it. It literally affects your ability to perform in a wide variety of jobs, especially physical ones. And you're not going to be able to be a pro basketball player or a football player or any of that stuff that allows a lot of people of color to raise the ranks of society and climb out of a lower position in the social hierarchy. We literally have fewer opportunities. And in today's day and age, what is there institutionally in society today that Black people or any person of any race other than white cannot do in America, where we've gone above and beyond to put in DEI measures? Heightism isn't just a preference, lady. And if you think that your race is preventing you from achieving your goals in life in modern day America, you're the one who's letting your insecurities take over and prevent you from making progress in life. So yeah, honestly, all the things you're complaining about are more in your head than heightism is in our head. If you watched the last section, you already know that heightism is more than just about dating. But let's humor them. Every one of these blue-pilled, mid-witted Redditors love to bring up lynchings like it's a common occurrence in 2026 America. They also like to use slavery the same way that Jews born after World War II like to claim to be Holocaust survivors for special victim points. But at least that was more recent than slavery. And the KKK? They don't do shit these days. Now, earlier, I mentioned how when interactions with police end in force and, how they talk about how your race has such a big impact on how you're treated by cops and authority and police brutality and all this stuff, but how the footage says otherwise and shows more of an indication about behavior affecting the outcome. And this guy, we've got a guy here, another man of color, sharing his lived experience about how little racism has affected his life. And he basically reiterates the exact same thing I was saying before.
There's this ongoing debate on TikTok basically saying, what is worse, heightism or racism? And I'm not going to lie, guys. I'm 5'11", 5'11 and a half. In my life specifically, I'm 21 years old, right? My race has never affected me. It's never affected me because I've always been well-spoken. I've always acted, professional.
A short guy can compose himself and act professionally and all that, and heightism will still have a massive impact on how people perceive him and treat him and see him as someone that they can step on and take advantage of. Someone who is not a threat whatsoever, that they don't have to hold back from humiliating, that they can take their anger out on without fear of reprisal and everyone else will just laugh because heightism is the last acceptable prejudice. You can't do that with race, now can you?
But I've had some women say, man, you know, if you were 6'2", right, 6'3", it's like, bro, I know this might be controversial, but I feel like heightism is worse. Like, if you're 5'6", 5'5" as a man, dude, it's like, it's hard. It's hard as fuck. And yeah, I know being black is hard, but my nigga, look, we're not in the 60s no more, bro. Times are different now.
I love that, dude. We're not in the 60s no more. That's what I've been saying this whole time, man. These people are acting like we're still in the 1960s, and everyone's sitting there liking their comments and patting them on the back and saying, yeah, we're fighting against oppression and all this shit. But it's like, that shit was dealt with. It's been dealt with. They've gone so far above and beyond to reverse that, to provide equity opportunities. And meanwhile, you're trying to keep the focus on that so that the heightism situation can just continue to go unaddressed and get worse and worse and worse. And he actually brings us into the whole dating preference thing as well. Like, I know heightism is a lot more than dating preference, but a lot of people like to talk about that. And they say, oh, your race has more of an effect on how much women like you than your height. And sure, there are some women that claim they would never date a black guy or never date a guy who's not white or whatever. But when it comes down to it, and you really get down to the nitty-gritty, I would guarantee you that they would choose a 6'5" black guy over a 5'3" white guy. And those women are very, very rare. And the vast majority of the time, race is a minor factor when compared to height. The color of your skin has zero impact on the quality of a male partner to a woman. Someone brought up the idea that if I was black, I'd be more likely to want to self-delete. But is that really true? So I ran these numbers myself because, as far as I can tell, nobody else has done this. In 2024, according to CDC data, white men in America took their own lives at 24.8 per 100,000. Only Native American men rank higher than that. Black men, 13.9. Asian men, 9.5. So white men are killing themselves at nearly double the rate of black men and triple the rate of Asian men. And somehow they still expect you to believe otherwise. Now here's the part nobody's calculated. There's a study out of Sweden, published in the American Journal of Psychiatry in 2005, that followed 1.3 million men. What they found was that every 5 centimeters of height came with a 9% drop in risk. That's about 4.7% per inch. So I took that gradient, laid it over the American male height distribution, and anchored it to the real overall U.S. male rate. Men under 5'4", 30.8 per 100,000. Men 6'2" and up, 16.5. And let me be straight with you. That's my estimate, not a published statistic. I'm applying data from Swedish men, followed to age 49, to Americans. But it's the best figure anyone has, because nobody has ever bothered to run it. And what it shows is that the shortest men in this country are dying by their own hand at a higher rate than the highest rate racial group in this country. So if the lives of white men are so much better, why are so many being driven to bring their own lives to an end? Could it have something to do with the collective lack of compassion society has for their struggles, simply because men of the past had it so good? I'd say that's a pretty big part of it. And the vast majority of the white men doing it just happen to be short. And since somebody always brings up the high rate among Native Americans, it's important to acknowledge that this is the one area where claims about the legacy of racism in the New World have some merit. Priceless ancient wisdom was lost forever in the boarding schools that dished out unimaginably cruel physical and sexual abuse to children recently enough that indigenous baby boomers never learned how to raise their kids properly and fell into rampant addiction to suppress the trauma which was passed on through generations of abuse and neglect. But imagine being stuck with no hope in an isolated reservation and being short. In the 1800s, Plains men averaged 5'8", the tallest population on the planet at the time. White American men averaged 5'7". But over the next 100 years, white Americans gained 3 or 4 inches. Native height didn't keep pace. That same 5'8" is now below average today. It's more than genetics. It's what generations of poverty does to how tall a population grows. And it's the exact mechanism I keep telling you that height is measuring in the first place. And you don't have to take it from me. So here we have a guy who thinks he's hot shit. He thinks he's smarter than the rest of us. So he's going to sit there from his pedestal on high and tell us how it is, even though we're the ones who've lived through it this whole time. Let's give a listen to this imbecile.
Is heightism worse than racism? That is a real debate. That is a real conversation. Obviously, racism is worse than heightism. Use your fucking brain. Historically speaking, racism has been used to justify some of, if not the, most cruel systems in human history. And while heightism has definitely been used to discriminate against others, there is nowhere near as much historical context and oppressive systems tied to heightism.
You know, he's not wrong about this. Like, he's wrong and he's right at the same time. The point is that using historical racism to say that racism today is worse than heightism is a bad argument. Even though he's trying to say that that historical racism has led to oppressive systems being put in place, you know, and when you look at institutional racism, there is institutional heightism as well, because the most positions of power in the world are occupied by taller people. And statistically, the taller a person is, the more likely they are to make more money. It's even like, it's like a linear line, like every inch adds like more money on average. If that's not an institutional prejudice, if that's not an oppression baked into a system and society, then I don't know what is.
Racism is used morally for a lot worse things than heightism has ever been used. People will use racism to justify dehumanizing entire groups of people.
Oh my God. So he's talking about racism being used to dehumanize entire groups of people. What do you think they're doing with heightism? What do you think that all of these people do, calling short guys manlets and saying that we're inferior and telling us to go end ourselves and that no one wants you and that they see you as less capable and less worthy and someone they can bully and take advantage of? How is that not dehumanizing? But let's see what else he has to say.
People, killing them, using them and viewing them as inferior to others solely because of something they cannot control.
Okay, first of all, we'll start with the most obvious thing. Race is something that you cannot control, but so is height. And people are being dehumanized for their height way more often than their race in the Western world in the modern day and age because there aren't social or financial or political consequences for that. I mean, if you watch my video about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she openly mocked her political rival by saying that he looks like he's 4'10" and he acts like it too. Imagine if a politician were to say, oh, he acts like he's a black guy and mean it as an insult. What kind of reaction would there be there? Now, this guy, the only way he has a legitimate point is if you're looking at racism across the entire world. Like, in a minute, we're going to talk about the Sudan conflict. Yes, people are being killed for their race there. But that's not what most of these sheltered SJW snowflakes are talking about when they're saying that racism is worse than heightism. They're thinking of the West. They're thinking of 2026 in America and in Europe that racism is worse. Because short men, they may not be being killed because they're hated for being short, but they often are killed because their shortness makes them an easier target, or they're bullied into wanting to take their own lives. I mean, what's worse, living a decent life and having it taken away, or being tormented your whole life to the point where each and every day is such a nightmarish situation that you would rather die than keep going? I don't know, to me, I think that the latter is worse, because you're in a living nightmare you can't wake up from, all as a result of something you can't control. Now, before someone in the comments thinks they've caught me in a logical error, let me explain something. You can't stack those two sets of numbers against each other because they're not rival groups. Every man in the height numbers has a race, every man in the race numbers has a height. A 5'4" white guy is in both. So there's no math that gives you heightism is 3 times worse than racism. And yeah, Hispanic men are the shortest group in America, and they have some of the lowest rates. Looks like that kills my whole argument, right? It doesn't, and here's why. That Swedish study compared Swedes to other Swedes. Within a population, height tracks suicide risk. But between populations, religion and family and social cohesion completely swamp it. It's the same thing I told you before about height variation inside a group being mostly genetic, while variation between groups is mostly environmental. So when you're looking at Hispanic men, you're looking at the influence of Catholicism and more traditional family units. When you're looking at black men, you're looking at higher rates of religion. Those are groups with something holding them together. Something that many short white guys in America just don't have. And none of that nullifies my point. My point is that one of those two things has an entire academic field asking why. The other one has a single Swedish paper from 2005 that wasn't even asking the question. So this American paper and many more are measuring risk by race, but only this one Swedish study has measured it by height. Somebody hit me with, gay guys take their own lives much more than short guys do. So I went and looked it up, because I don't like saying things I can't back up. Turns out there's no direct number for gay men because sexual orientation doesn't go on death certificates. What researchers do instead is pull marriage and partnership records and follow those men in the death registry. When they do that, gay men come out at roughly 2 times the risk. My numbers for short men came out at almost 1.9. Same ballpark. Not way more. Not even close to way more. Practically in the margin of error. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I've known gay men and gay couples my whole life. So this isn't me guessing from the outside. And I say this as someone who's the Q in LGBTQ. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend a short gay man has it as bad as I do. He doesn't. Because in gay dating, the roles work differently. There are way more taller, dominant tops actively looking for small men in the gay community than there are tall women seeking small men. In fact, that number is almost non-existent. I want to be proved wrong. Please, if you're a woman like that, let me know in the comments. So a short gay man is competing in a market where he has a niche role available to fill. There's no equivalent to that on the straight side. A short straight man is competing in a world of hypergamy, where almost every potential mate would rather stay single for life or turn bi than settle for a small man. There is a tiny minority of outliers and exceptions to this rule, but in those rare cases, looks become the main deciding factor. Now think about what that means for the numbers. That 2 times figure only covers partnered gay men, because a partnership leaves a paper trail. Every single gay man in the country got left out. Nobody can measure that missing group, and the researchers admit it. But based on everything I just told you, being single in the gay world usually means being single with options. They've got little to no hypergamy. No wonder everyone's always saying, just be gay. So my bet is, if those single guys got counted, that 2 times normal rate number gets smaller, not bigger. That's my assessment, not a real statistic. But only one side of this debate has a favorable dating market, and it's not mine. And the comparison group has its own problem. Unmarried straight men covers a lot of different guys. It counts guys with girlfriends, guys living with somebody, guys with active sex lives who just never signed anything. All that pulls the hetero rate down and makes the gap look bigger than it really is. The chronically single guy I'm talking about, the one with nobody, is buried inside that average, getting propped up by tall chads who are sleeping around, or with girlfriends they're basically married to and everything but name. Which brings me to the part nobody thinks about. Short gay men exist. Being tall pays off whether the person you want is a man or a woman. So height isn't competing with sexual orientation here. It's running underneath it. the same way it runs underneath race. And of course, the next objection, somebody had to bring up the ethnic cleansing of non-Arabs in Sudan, but there's a few problems with that. First off, that's not simple racism. It's politics, religion, and class warfare too. An all-out war isn't the same thing as everyday prejudice. There's clearly a racist component to the war, sure, but that should tell you who the real racists actually are. Women and people of color in the West have no idea how good they have it. You can say racism is worse than Heightism in China or Sudan, and it might hold up. But to say it about the modern-day West is absolutely absurd. One of the most annoying objections is when people victim blame us by saying all our problems are self-inflicted. That if we were confident or didn't have Napoleon complex, our height wouldn't affect our lives at all. Now, aside from me being living proof of that not being true, the reality is, if we're confident, people will just perceive it as overcompensating. I talk more about it in my video about the Napoleon complex, but let's dig into what these people say. Now we got Mr. Performative Know-It-All over here, proving that horseshoe theory is real, trying to talk at us about how Heightism really is. And I don't think he realizes it, but he gets tripped up in some pretty bad logic here, you'll see.
Heightism, there might be some negative stereotypes attached to you, and maybe you'll be jealous of people that are taller. A lot of the Heightism thing is a mental battle more than anything.
Okay, so he's boiling it down to we're jealous of people that are taller, but what about how people that are taller look at us or treat us? All of the disrespect and degrading humiliation that gets forced upon us by people who know that they have the upper hand because they stand head and shoulders above you. He's basically victim blaming here, trying to say that it's all in our heads.
I'm not denying that it doesn't exist, but I am saying that I've seen plenty of instances of short guys who are happy, who have relationships, who have partners, and they don't let something like their height, which they cannot control, influence them.
Now here's where that bad logic I was mentioning earlier comes into play. Because he's basically saying that because he knows short guys who have been successful in life in relationships, even though they're statistical outliers and anomalies, that means that it's all in our head. And that if we just got over our problems and insecurities, that we would have just as much of a chance as everyone else. But imagine if we were to say that, if I was to say that as a white person to a person of color, say, well, I know plenty of black people. I know plenty of people who are the same race as you who have been very successful in life. It's all in your head, blah, blah, blah. They would be offended. People would be pissed. But the reality is that is a lot more true than what he's saying about height. Because all of the DEI and equity programs that are in place, all of the opportunities that a person of color, specifically a tall person of color, has to get ahead in life is far beyond what any short person has because we aren't even recognized as a person who's disadvantaged. So we don't even have any kind of equity programs that are similar, even though there is statistics and evidence to prove that we're severely disadvantaged in life, just like that Times article from 1971 said, that Heightism stands toe-to-toe with racism. And that was back when racism was a lot worse. So don't give me this ridiculous double standard bullshit.
Whereas when it comes to race, you're going to experience racism regardless, right? That's not up to you to decide.
Well, how about you don't let your race that you can't control influence you, huh? Oh, you're experiencing racism? Well, just don't let it affect you. How does that sound? I have been a masochistic short guy who actually gets off on this shit, who likes being looked down on and bullied and humiliated and all that stuff. And I've been that way for the last 10 years, and I can tell you, as a matter of fact, that Heightism still has held me back in life, even though it's not an issue mentally in my head. So obviously, we're going to experience Heightism regardless. Whereas so much has been done to reverse racism in the last 50 years that the reverse is far more true than what this guy's saying. Now we got both blue pillars and red pillars looking down from their high horse, telling us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and just be confident, bro. How would you feel if you were under 5'6" and went through life hearing comments like this? Yet they give the pass to black people who go through life with a chip on their shoulder because someone walked down an escalator or crossed the street in front of them. You say short men have an inferiority complex, but I say tall men have a superiority complex. Which is a more toxic manifestation of masculinity? I'd like to hear your thoughts below. Now here we got a guy who's a lot more reasonable than the last two clips that I showed you. And while he actually does give a good argument for why racism still makes an impact in people's lives, he also is very sympathetic towards our end of things. And in this objection of, oh, all these bad things happen to you as a short guy because you have Napoleon complex, by the end of this clip, he explains why that's bullshit.
White is a motherfucker, but race, people are openly racist to like Indians and Arabs. Black people, you see Chuck the Builder calling them slurs and shit like that for no reason.
Okay, definitely want to disavow Chud the Builder. This Chud the Builder guy is honestly the main reason why all these people are coming out against me, trying to say that racism is more alive than ever. It's all because of Chud the Builder. He is the one pushing this. And if it wasn't for him, they would have a lot less legitimacy in their talking points right now.
The police brutality, things like that is very crucial.
Okay, he mentions police brutality. As long as you comply and are reasonable with law enforcement, everything should go smoothly, except in very, very rare cases. But now that we've got body cams, people are being held accountable for everything they do. So yeah, fuck around and find out. That's all I have to say about that.
The way that the world is, and they're trying to incite a civil war against black and white people, and so many people are against black people. It's not just white people, Mexicans, Koreans, everybody that come here always bands with white people.
You know what? There's a lot of truth in that, especially like not only in real life, but in prisons too. And honestly, like all over the world, like black people are seen as some kind of strange anomaly in Japan and Korea. And in China, they're straight up not even allowed in most places of businesses. Like if you're gonna act like racism in the West is worse than heightism, that's absurd. But if you're gonna say racism in China is worse than heightism, you've got a strong case there.
So it depends on what race you are. Because if you say being black versus height, that should be kind of cruel. But then at the same time, they got things about short people. They'll say you Napoleon complex. The motherfucker just mad and upset. It could be for a reasonable reason. But because he's short, he got that stigma on him. I mean, brutal.
I really appreciate him recognizing the stigma and the aura and the halo effect that height provides, and the reality that if you're a short guy, you're not allowed to have feelings. You're not allowed to have any emotion other than passive acceptance of whatever the world does to you. If you show any kind of emotional reaction to someone doing wrong or someone mistreating or disrespecting you, oh, that's not a reasonable response. That's only because you're a short guy. But if you did the same exact thing to a guy who was average height or tall, that same person would just think, oh, that person is reacting justifiably to something bad that this other person did to them. So yeah, that's a pretty active stigma in today's day and age. Now, before anyone comes at me, let me be clear. Yeah, per capita, black people are killed by police at a higher rate than white people. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that number doesn't exist, because it does. It's around 2.5 times the rate. I'm not interested in lying to you. So here's what I actually think is going on. I've watched hundreds of body cam footage videos from all across America on channels like eWoo, Code Blue, and Midwest Safety, and in every case I've seen, the cops only got aggressive after someone resisted, fought, or tried to run. That's what I saw with my own eyes. And the other thing nobody wants to talk about is how selective the coverage is. A story only goes national when the victim is black and the cop is white. If the victim is white or the cop isn't white, you never hear about it. And every single year, the majority of people killed by police are actually white. But you'd have no idea, because those stories don't get outrage clicks. So the disparity is real. It's just that the picture you've been handed is built on which cases get shown and which ones get buried. And also, I know it's not the same as police brutality, but I can back up what this guy right here says about bouncers. They always single me out too. But many of these rotten souls have a hypocrisy problem. They whinge and moan about identity politics with leftist talking points while verbally brutalizing and body-shaming short men for a characteristic they can't change. It's like they're LARPing as Martin Luther King Jr., except Dr. King would despise them because they clearly learned nothing. So one of the reasons that, to me personally, it feels so absurd to try and claim that racism against people of color is a worse problem in 2026 in the West than Heightism is the obvious fact that, from my point of view, things have gone so far in the opposite direction that you could even argue that white people are more oppressed than people of color, especially in Europe. So you've got these police who are not punishing the heinous acts of these Pakistani grooming gangs, but they almost exclusively targeted white girls. And it's a well-known phenomenon over there in the UK. And that's where this next clip comes from. I'm not just making this shit up. You've got a young girl who came out bravely sharing her experience on the news, only to be harassed by the police because they want to control the narrative. They want to continue to have everyone believe that things are the other way around. She summarizes it right here on this tweet. I went on TV to discuss Pakistani grooming gangs in my Labour-run hometown of Telford. Labour government is the leftist government over there. The next day, officers banged on my door wanting to shut me up for exposing them. With the Online Safety Act now in force, that's the act that they put in last year to control speech online, even more than they already were, no one is safe. If it happened to me, it can happen to anyone. Now let's hear what she has to say.
Up to 1,000 girls had been reported to have been abused, and the scale of police, council and social services failings. I went back to Telford, and the next day around lunchtime, 2 police officers banged on my door demanding that I speak to them about my interview.
So the police who have done nothing for the entire third millennium to date suddenly were roused to activity by you going on television.
Yeah, they told me that they had gone round to all of the addresses they had on file for me. They told me that, quote unquote, when you go on GB News and talk about grooming gangs in Telford, it's our duty to follow up with you. I said to them at the time, it was funny that they did absolutely nothing to bring my abusers to justice, but when I went on national TV and talked about the industrial scale of their failings and their inaction, that they are suddenly spurred into action to come and knock on my door and intimidate me into silence.
How sickening is that? I don't see how you can sit back and act like, in the West, specifically Europe, that people of color are the ones facing oppression, when you have police literally intimidating a 12-year-old girl into silence, not giving a shit about comforting her for what she's gone through or bringing her abusers to justice. And meanwhile, you have literally 1,000 young girls having the same thing happen to them in one single town. It's almost enough to make you think the police are in on it. I know one thing, I do not trust British police. Now, you might be wondering, what the hell does this have to do with Heightism, dude? Imagine being a short white guy in a country like that, where not only are you an easy target to be dominated and intimidated and bullied, but if you're around people who know that because you're white and they're not, they can get away with a lot more, on top of not having to fear any kind of physical pushback or physical danger as a result, you're going to end up spending your life living in fear, afraid to go outside. You know, how is that fair? Be very careful of falling into the trap of white apologism. Cries of racism or Islamophobia are often used to exploit the goodwill of Western host societies, inhibiting investigation and enforcement, and building a perception that the West is a place where abusive, exploitative, or criminal behavior is permitted with little consequence, which further reinforces the cycle and punishes victims for speaking out. Those privileged white women who voted for it end up being the ones who suffer the most as a result. But we all know who they'll blame. Now here's another example. I've got this 40-second clip of this pink-haired chick blaming white men for the German Pride Parade attack. This tweet summarizes what she says. So, a known Islamist drives into a pride parade in Berlin, killing at least one person. And somehow, it's white men's fault. White males are blamed for literally everything in this world, but short white men carry the burden of getting the most hate for it. All by women who see us as just as privileged as tall men, but they don't want to ruin their chances with the tall ones, so they treat them like they can do no wrong and just take all their anger out on us. They call us inkwells and fascists. We become the scapegoat for everything. Hell, even non-white people who want to take their racial anger out on us might choose to antagonize a short white guy over a tall one because the little guy is an easier target.
So today, in Berlin, there was an attack. A van drove through a crowd of people celebrating Berlin Pride Parade that they have every year, and they injured 17 people, and one person is dead. So the suspect is an Islamic extremist. That's their suspect right now. That's what I read, okay? I'm not going to say anything about the rest of the Muslim population because of actions of this one person.
See how careful she is? See how afraid she is to offend? You know, she is walking on eggshells to try and make sure everyone knows that she is not a bigot. But then you've got all these women on TikTok that have no fear at all of the social kickback that might happen when they drag short men through the mud. They say that all short men have Napoleon syndrome and they all have bad attitudes and it's because they're short. I mean, look at the contrast between how they treat each marginalized group, because we're both marginalized groups.
But what I can say is the people who were celebrating were all white men, young white men. We've all seen how you guys react towards gay people and how you wish harm on them constantly. I get a constant hate on my videos, especially about trans people. You're not going to hide behind another scapegoat group and pretend that they're actually the violent ones when it's you.
Oh, yeah. The guy who's sitting there speaking his mind and sharing his opinion with words online, he's the violent one, not the one who drives through crowds of people driven by hatred against these infidels and their gay pride parade. And who the hell is celebrating this? If anybody's celebrating this shit, fuck you. Yeah, they're absolutely in the wrong. But she's using this as an excuse to kick all white men to the ground. And honestly, the majority of those guys celebrating this are doing it because they see it as a sacrifice that needs to be made in order to turn and sway public opinion to realize that this situation in Europe is a problem. Now, I don't know if this girl's gay or not, but if she's not, I guarantee you, if she met a tall white man, she wouldn't care what his political beliefs were. Because a guy who's like 6'5", who's like 1 in 1,000, she's not going to let that get in the way. But a short guy, he's going to get all the blame. He's going to get all the anger taken out. People lost their jobs or livelihoods simply for criticizing organizations like BLM. That tells you where the true power lies. The ones with power can say whatever they want without consequences, while punishing you for straying even slightly off the path they want you to follow. Just like how heightism is rampant and unpunished, but short men, especially white men, are treated by feminists and performative males like we're guilty until proven innocent, and institutions constantly police our speech and ideas. And the biggest hypocrisy is when these very same white feminist SJWs who degrade short men decide to make themselves the gatekeepers of what makes someone black. Dare to be a black man who goes against the grain? Prepare for some real genuine racism. Like when this Karen bitch decided to call a black ICE agent a house nigger. which are the slaves who kissed up to their masters and turned on their fellows in exchange for easier work in the plantation house.
How do you feel about ripping people from their family? Does that feel good? The fucking house is here. Sir, I need to move. Fucking house here working for the fucking KKK. What the fuck's wrong with you people? Fucking house, bitch. Go look for your fucking slave.
Hard R. Yep. Said with hatred. Straight to the man's face. Not a joke. Overall, you can see why it seems to me like these people care more about what happened in the past and what's happening now. But what's the trajectory of all this? If Heightism continues to be sidelined, where's all this headed? Well, I have a few predictions. Firstly, women have more power than ever before in history. And with more women than men in office jobs and higher education in Gen Z, Heightism's only bound to get worse. As hiring power shifts toward women, who do you think they're going to show preferential treatment towards? Either other women or tall guys. They'll use their positions to enact revenge on men for the patriarchy by abusing their power. But only short men will feel the effects of this retaliation, since they favor the tall men in the office as eye candy. And if you think segregation can only be a race thing, think again. I've thought in detail about how height segregation could develop naturally over time. In evolution, an animal's size equates to its success. With each generation, a species grows larger as it becomes more successful in its niche. The modern-day elite know this, and my theory is they want to divide us into separate subspecies where taller people are more successful and smaller ones serve them. And even if nobody planned it this way, the growing class stratification would manifest it naturally. Gives them plausible deniability. As taller people concentrate in wealthy communities and homes over generations, the height of furniture and public infrastructure will be adjusted to fit their needs. They might also have their own line of larger luxury vehicles. As the tall people have more money, their ATMs and parking meters and store checkout counters would be of the most secure and highest quality available. This could fall under the definition of separate and unequal, the thing that the civil rights movement was trying to do away with, especially since the taller one would be out of reach for the shorter person, but technically the taller person could always access the shorter one. But since this form of segregation would be privately funded, it would likely go forward anyway, through some legal loophole. It's basically a physical manifestation of public space that molds itself in the image of those who use it. It's one of the best ways for the elite to exclude those below them, as a wordless way of expressing,
"Your presence is unnatural here. Go away, you don't belong. This world isn't built for you."
It infantilizes you, makes you feel like a child. Like in order to live here, you'd have to depend on a taller person just to get by. How humiliating. The truth is, heightism will keep getting worse until it gets public recognition. This is the purpose of my channel. Public acknowledgement has the potential to stop the dark path our society is headed down. Evil burns when exposed to the purifying light of awareness. So what would you rather be? A 5'3" white guy or a 6'5" black guy? If you want the algorithm to suggest more videos like this in the future, give this video a like. And to show me who the real homies are, comment truth bomb if you made it to the end. This was my most difficult video to make ever. So every bit of engagement I get, I greatly appreciate. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay connected and be notified when I upload. And check out this video here. YouTube's algorithm picked it just for you. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. My next video is going to be a little different.